This episode is kindly sponsored by Unitemps. Started by the University of Warwick in 1997, Unitemps is a university-owned, campus-based recruitment service which addresses the key staffing challenges in higher education. For nearly 30 years, it has made a significant and tangible contribution to enhancing student employability. There are currently 20 universities in the UK with on-campus Unitemps offices, the majority of which sit within university careers departments. Unitemps offers a university the opportunity to benefit from having their own on-campus recruitment team to supply temporary staff across internal departments, run internship schemes, work with local businesses, and promote graduate employment opportunities. Partnering with Unitemps also gives universities access to HE-tailored recruitment systems, the ability to tackle issues such as legislative compliance, efficiencies and cost savings, while also enhancing the student experience. I'm Susanna Marsden, a higher education consultant who helps to develop and support HE institutions in the UK and beyond. This podcast takes a deep dive into the roles of people who work in this hugely varied higher education sector. Each episode reveals what's involved in a specific role, the career path that led to it, and tips on how to get in and get on in these jobs. My guest in this episode is Gemma Kenyon, Director of Careers and Employability at City St George's, University of London. Gemma shares more about her role and how she successfully directed and embedded a student employability and career focus into institutional life. We talk about how she and her team have gone about collaborating successfully with academic colleagues to achieve this goal, how work is prioritised to best support student success, and what the future focus of careers and employability might hold. We also discuss Gemma's career to date, including navigating being a young leader and the skills she's developed along the way. Gemma, welcome to Job Shadowing HE, and thanks for being my guest in this episode. You're Director of Careers and Employability at City St George's, University of London, and a post that you've held for nearly 10 years. What does the scope of your role and the work of your team look like?
Hi Susanna, thanks for having me today. Great to be here. I'd say my role is a balance of two different aspects. The first is that I lead and manage a team in the department, so a team of around 40 members of staff in the Careers and Employability Directorate. And in terms of that sort of responsibility, it's your classic head of department type duties. It's setting the strategic direction, it's line management, it's budget management, it's HR matters, etc. And then I'd say the other half of my time I spend being a strategic lead for employability across the university more generally. So we have a way of working at City St George's called Head of Profession, which means that there's various senior managers across the institution who've been identified as strategic leads on different themes. And I'm the strategic lead for employability. I'm the head of profession for employability. And that means I officially have responsibility for strategic direction in terms of employability matters at an institutional level. So that means I'm devising new strategies, I'm supporting staff in other areas of the university to ensure we all work together to efficiently and effectively achieve our whole holistic goals for the university.
Your career started as a recruitment consultant for a couple of years before moving into higher education, where you've since worked in several London-located institutions in a series of increasingly senior roles. Can you say some more about those career steps? And I'm also interested to know, a big question here for a Director of Careers and Employability, was it always your plan to become a careers professional?
It wasn't, funnily enough. So that is very odd for an employability professional, as you say. But yeah, no, I did definitely learn a lot from working in recruitment. I didn't know what I was going to do when I graduated. Really, I knew I was sort of interested in recruitment matters, and so I that's what I did first. But it really gave me that knowledge of what employers look for. Obviously, how to write great applications, how to perform well in interview, because I was coaching my candidates through those kinds of processes and talking to my employer career clients about those matters. And it was also a very highly target-driven sales environment. So whilst that was quite challenging at the time, I think looking back, I learned some really important skills like how to persuasively communicate with people, how to be very self-motivated, and how to have really good commercial awareness as well about what clients are looking for. But as you say, it's quite odd. I didn't have long-term career plans back then, and which now looking back is quite funny. So it was actually only around the 2008 financial recession when I realised that actually I wanted to work in a university careers service. And that's because, unsurprisingly, the recruitment industry was really badly affected by the recession. And I, like many other relatively young graduates working in recruitment, we had to seek alternative employment at the time. And I realised that myself and very few of my peers doing that work had the skills and knowledge required to navigate a career change effectively. We were all graduates from fantastic universities up and down the country, but none of us had the career management skills we needed to navigate that time really well. So I kind of had an epiphany that I knew I wanted to support students to be better prepared than I was when you inevitably have those changes in the labour market. We are working and living in very turbulent times, and unfortunately you can't plan for these sorts of things. I do think equipping our students with the skills to be able to navigate turbulence in their careers is really critical. So that's what I then had the epiphany that's what I wanted to do. And I initially started as a placements officer, so I was working with students who were seeking year placements, and then I became a careers advisor, and then I've ultimately become a head of department. And looking back, I did at university, I did occupational psychology, which at the time I wasn't sure where that would fit, but actually looking back now, it's a great fit for where I've ended up.
And you talked us through your career path to date there and your motivation. I mean, being a senior leader in the careers profession, you also have the privilege of seeing other colleagues coming into it, both in your own team and more widely across the sector. What do the skill sets look like of colleagues coming into an HE Careers and Employability team?
Yeah, really varied, and probably more varied than people would necessarily expect. So it's really common for people to become a careers consultant as a career changer from lots of different sectors. So it could be recruitment like myself, or it could be teaching, or it could be lots of other corporate areas. So for example, it's not uncommon for specific backgrounds to be sought for a role. So for example, a university might want an ex-lawyer to work with law students, for example. So it might be something that even on paper seems very different. Actually, you're bringing in that knowledge of that labour market and those roles, and some universities really value that in certain settings. And employer engagement staff often come from graduate recruitment roles, or they might come from a sales-driven environment. And we also have lots of various specialist roles in our department as well, which again, people necessarily wouldn't think of. So we have our in-house recruitment agency, Unitemp, so kindly the sponsors of this episode. They're obviously coming from industry, but we also have data and systems specialists and marketing specialists. So for those roles, you can come from lots of different sectors.
And I guess the main motivation of any colleague coming into a team like yours or a profession like yours is that desire to see and help students succeed. In that motivational context, how do you help colleagues manage the parameters of what that support looks like to make sure that, that works to do with their own well-being?
Yeah, I think it's a really pertinent question at the moment. So, it's one of the things that's a great joy of our work, but it's also a challenge with our work as well. So it is right that whilst our roles and backgrounds within the service can be very broad, the thing that brings us all together as a department is that everyone working in this area has a genuine passion for helping students. And that's really why we do this work. It's why we give everything that we do to our students and our partners. Recognising that obviously our work is so strategically important to universities now as well, with all of the metrics. There's also the fact that the work is never done. So there's always going to be, however successful you are, however great your university is, however employable your graduates are, there's always going to be some unemployed graduates, or graduates that even when they have secured a professional role or further study opportunity, they aren't happy with that option and they want to explore other options, or they want to change career later on. So like many universities, we now provide lifelong support for our graduates. So all of those career changes down the way, it really is endless. And the labour market's always changing, of course, as well. So there's an infinite number of employers for us to work with. And with having so many international students, our work is global, because we're trying to support our international students to achieve career success in their home countries as well. So when you add all of that together, you kind of really understand that the scale to our work is really endless. You know, you could spend literally every hour of every day and you still wouldn't get it done, because it is endless what we're trying to achieve. And of course, this is against a backdrop of squeezed resources as well, like many universities up and down the country. So we have to really have an important sense of our priorities, so we can make sure that we are using the limited resources we have to the best impact possible. And that might mean we focus on courses or groups of students that have worse outcomes in the labour market, because we understand that those students need our support more than others. But it's a real challenge. I mean, the latest findings from ADCAS, our professional body, is that 58% of heads of service find it a challenge to have work-life balance. So getting that balance right, where you're achieving your priorities and also recognising that you can't do everything, is going to be really critical.
You moved into a leadership position at a young age in comparison with some of your director peers at other institutions. How would you reflect back on your leadership journey across that time?
It's been really exciting, and I'm really lucky to have transitioned at such a young stage in my career. So when I transitioned into my previous role, which was I was the head of careers for the small and specialist universities in the University of London, I was only 28, and I was really fortunate at the time that my departing line manager saw the leadership potential in me, despite my young age. But it has been a challenge at times, being younger than people expect of what you would be in a director role. And it has been remarked to me in the past that sometimes people assume that when you're younger, you lack the resilience required for a senior role. And I think some of the biggest challenges that often you will face is overcoming any negative assumptions that people might have about you because you are a bit younger than they'd expect. So that could be key senior people that you need to influence within your university, or it could be the staff that you manage. Sometimes if they're significantly older than you, they might have these negative assumptions, and you just face an extra need to prove yourself, So for me, it was quite motivating. It was a driver to sort of demonstrate that I was resilient, that I did have what it was required. But yeah, it can be an additional drain on having to prove yourself in those spaces.
And is there anything in particular that you would say you do differently now as a leader than you did when you held your first leadership position?
I'd say that I'm definitely better at recognising that implementing change takes time. So particularly in complex organisations like universities. I think when I was a bit earlier on in a leadership role, I sort of thought that I could get everything done a lot quicker. And I think what I've realised is that if you're going to manage change well in a large complex organisation, like anything in our sector, you have to sort of take your time with it, because otherwise that you won't be effective in implementing that change. So it's better to take your time and to pace that implementation, because ultimately the outcome of the results is going to be better, because you're going to have the time to get all of your stakeholders on board and make sure that you're really thinking through the detail of what's needed. I'd also say I put more emphasis into thinking creatively about navigating the institutional politics. I think that the more experience that you get, the more you realise the importance of navigating those politics, and it's those relationships that you form with key people, and those are going to be key people that are very much pro your agenda. So particularly in my space, people who really believe in employability and the importance of employability, but equally those that don't as well, and navigating those politics and building relationships is absolutely critical. So I'd say I put a lot more time into building relationships now than I used to. And that's both internally with stakeholders, but also externally as well, because you never know when some of those connections are going to become really useful. There might be a new project that you're working on, or, a new challenge that comes your way, and actually having a really broad network both within the university and outside of the university can be really helpful.
City St George's, where you are director, positions itself as the University for Business Practice in the Professions, and therefore, perhaps unsurprisingly, the first headline in the Vision and Strategy 2030 includes a focus on enabling graduates to succeed in their future careers and life pathways. Now, that institutional context looks like a professional gift for a Director of Careers and Employability. Can you say a bit more about what you've been doing to realise that vision for the institution and perhaps more importantly for students?
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. I mean, I've been really fortunate at City St George's to have the opportunities that I've had to have an institutional role. So not just about the department per se, but about our whole vision as a university. What are we doing to support the employability of our graduates? And as you say, we're a very ambitious university, particularly in the employability space. So I've been really fortunate to have the endorsement of the executive to really push forward with some very innovative new strategies and really making it structurally unavoidable for our students to develop their employability whilst they're with us. So we have a strategy called the Career Activation Programme. And I'm pleased to say it's now our award-winning strategy, the Career Activation Programme, because we won the Institute of Student Employers Best University and Employer Engagement Strategy 2024. So this is our university strategy where all of our undergraduate students have two things that are core and credit bearing in their courses. The first is that they all have an employability education module, and all of those modules are bespoke to the discipline. So we've designed a whole suite of modules that are been designed collaboratively with the programme director, really thinking about the nuances of those labour markets, the nuances of the career readiness needs that those students have, the skills that they need for the outcomes that they tend to go on to, and delivering those so that all of those modules are core and credit bearing. And then secondly, all of our undergraduate students do professional experience as well. So designing a whole suite of work-based learning modules, because we recognise that for many of our students who we're very fortunate we attract a lot of students who are the first in their family to go to university or from lower socioeconomic backgrounds. They can't afford the time or the money to take a year out of study to a year placement for many of them. So what we've done instead is designed a whole suite of work-based learning modules that they can do during their 3-year period to kind of get that professional experience. And again, all of those professional experience modules have been designed to be bespoke to the discipline, very highly tailored to different labour markets, but with a requirement that our students have to take one of those things. So when they graduate, they have those two foundational pillars that they need to enter the labour market successfully. They have the employability education that they need to understand the labour market and themselves and their skills and present themselves competitively to a recruiter. But also, secondly, they have that professional experience as well. So they've got that practical experience they can talk about in interviews and applications. And secondly, I'm also working on a new strategy at the moment. We're just at the end of finishing it. So we're just almost there with the graduate attributes. So the way I think about this is that our career activation programme helps our graduates to secure their first professional role after graduation. Our graduate attributes project is more about their longer term skills, because again, we recognise that for many of our students, they will change career in their lifetimes. We know that the labour market's constantly changing, and so what we did is we did some research with our employer partners to understand what skills are they really looking for both now and in the future, and we're integrating those skills into how we teach all of our curricula. So that's at UG and PGT level. All of our core modules now have a requirement that all 5 of our graduate attributes have to be in the teaching of those modules. And also we're mapping those attributes against our extracurricular activities. So when a student comes out, both in terms of their curricular experiences, but also their extracurricular experiences, they've got a really rich portfolio of experience and confidence with displaying the skills that employers look for.
Picking up on the Careers Activation Programme that you just mentioned there, and congratulations, by the way, on the award, you mentioned that the modules have been designed collaboratively between your team and each academic department. And I think also some of your colleagues teach on those modules too. So I'm interested to know, achieving that position and having that programme in place is a tremendous amount of work, but there's also a lot of unseen work, I guess, behind the scenes in relationship building between your team and academic colleagues. When you started the work, to what extent would you say that creating those relationships was a cultural shift for your team and for academic departments?
Yeah, it was a huge shift. So when I started at City St George's, or Legacy City as it was back then, we only had one credit-bearing module in the curriculum. And now we've expanded that to the employability education modules in all of the undergraduate disciplines, plus the work-based learning modules as well. So it's been a major journey both for me and my team. So I've been working on myself. I've developed my skills around curriculum design. So I'm now a senior fellow of the Higher Education Academy in recognition of the experiences that I've gone through of developing myself and developing that area of knowledge in my practice. But I've also been developing the team as well, thinking about that really so we have the credibility to have those conversations, those nuanced conversations with academics, to work with them to design these modules to be bespoke. So it was a shift both for myself and the team, but I'd also say it was a shift for academic colleagues who weren't used to working with a professional service department in this way. You know, it was quite a new, radical departure really for the university to have a professional services department collaborating so actively with an academic school to think about these things. You wouldn't normally do that in such an in-depth way when it comes to curriculum design.
And what would you say were, some of the key approaches that you took to creating those relationships, and how have they evolved across time?
I'd say one of the best, in hindsight, one of the really useful features of the Career Activation Programme is how, whilst it's a university level strategy, the modules are designed to be bespoke to the discipline. And I think that was really appreciated by the programme directors. So it was very time consuming working with each programme director. You can imagine that we had to all of those individual conversations, we really did have to take our time with it, and it's much more sort of labour intensive at the time. But it did mean that we were able to form a really collaborative relationship with each programme director to design the modules that really fit the context of the subject matter. Because, I think that's really at the heart of the strategy, is that the career needs of the cohort and the labour markets the students tend to go on to need to shape the curriculum design. And it should, the embedded employability should feel really contextual to the discipline, because that's how you get great outcomes, obviously, but it's also how you get satisfied students, because they can see the connection between their subject and the education that they're receiving. So I think taking that really personal approach and that bespoke approach, I think it was very highly appreciated by the academics, whilst it was an institutional strategy. And of course, there was a sort of an element of saying, you have to do this, it's an institutional strategy. They really appreciated the ability to shape what we were putting into their curriculum around their needs.
And what would you say are the transferable skills in how your team approaches its relationship with academic colleagues, and how that might work for other professional services teams, I don't know, such as quality assurance team or alike, who also need to forge those strong relationships with academic colleagues?
I'd say something that in hindsight I think helped a lot was I did put a lot of time into those sort of informal meetings before the big committees. So I think, and this is something maybe as you get more experience in HE, you realise that actually the power of those informal meetings before big committees, it's really in those informal meetings where you get the real decision making, and you can really sound out people, and that's how you can adapt your approach, and you can have that two-way conversation to make sure that you're really bringing people with you. So I'd say that's a really key learning, is to invest time and make that time in those informal meetings. It's obviously difficult with workload, but ultimately I think it does deliver better success in the end, because you have stakeholders that are much more on board with what you're needing to do with them. And I think that balancing of an institutional commitment with discipline level nuance as well, it's obviously going to be easier in some contexts than others, but if it's possible when you're thinking about a strategy or a new policy to have an institutional approach balanced with that discipline level nuance, I think that does help get people on board as well.
And how have your team found it working with academic colleagues? What would they say if I was to ask them how they found those relationships?
I think they'd say that it's obviously mixed. Anything to do with relationships is mixed in a university, isn't it? Or any large organisation is mixed. But yeah, I think they'd say that the investment in their professional development has really helped. It's helped them to have the credibility to step into those spaces. We refer to ourselves now as third space professionals. We are technically professional services staff, of course, but we really see ourselves as bridging that gap between professional services and academia. And I think as they've invested in their own professional development as well, they feel confident and credible stepping into that space.
City St George's has a hugely diverse student population, and a significant proportion are first in their family to university, as you mentioned earlier on. Building upon the theme of relationships we've just been talking about, how do you and your team get to understand different students' needs and tailoring the support and services that you offer?
Data is a huge part of this. So that's one of the things where career services, I think, have really moved on in the span of my career, is we have such a sense of quality and quantity of data about our students now that we never used to have before. So we, like many universities, we collect what we call careers registration data in the enrolment process. So these are questions that we've embedded into enrolment. So first year point, but also when students re-enroll for second and third year, and of course when postgraduate students are enrolling as well. So we get the kind of live career needs information at that point. We also have embedded questions in the graduation survey as well. So at the graduation point, we're collecting data about how much of students moved on, what's their career readiness point at that stage, and what are their needs at that point. So we're able to pinpoint grads who we think are going to suffer more or kind of struggle more in the labour market, because they're telling us at that critical graduation point what their career readiness needs are. And then we also do an additional phone survey of our graduates as well, 6 months after graduation. So that's to follow up with them to find how are they experiencing that early transition into the labour market. And we use that information to then do graduate outreach work to support those grads into finding professional employment. So yeah, collecting of data and analysing data is obviously really critical. And of course, we have the graduate outcomes survey like every university. And like many universities as well, we also analyse that graduate outcomes survey by EDI variables. So we would understand from that data if there's certain demographic groups of students who are struggling more in the labour market. And of course, that's also picked up in the Access and Participation Plan as well, where we are set targets by the OFS to reduce gaps in outcomes for certain groups of students. So yeah, we're taking a very data-informed approach, I suppose, just to summarise all of that, to really trying to understand our students at every stage of the student journey and what we can do better to support them. It goes back to what I was saying before about limited resources. We need to be really conscious and intentional about how we are devoting our resource at different stages of the student journey. So an example of what we do is through analysis of the graduate outcomes survey, we've identified certain groups of students that we know are struggling more in the labour market, and we've developed a tailored scheme for them. So we have a scheme called Careers Ahead, and this is for students with a disability, care leavers, or LGBTQ+. And this is a streamlined process for having longer and unlimited one-to-one careers appointments with a dedicated careers consultant, because we understand that for those students, they may not want to tell their story more than once to lots of different members of staff, and having that dedicated relationship with one individual who can support them through their student journey is going to be really critical. So that's an example of how we looked at the data, we understood what the needs were of those students, and we devised something very tailored and bespoke for them.
And you've talked within that about the demographics of your student body, and we talked earlier about colleagues entering the careers profession. And I'm wondering to what extent the demographic of your colleagues in your institution, or maybe in the sector more broadly, is reflective of the student cohorts that they're supporting.
Yeah, it's quite mixed, unfortunately. So I think in some areas of the work, we have been much better at attracting diverse talent into the department. And in others, unfortunately, we're less diverse than we would like to be. This is a sector problem. And particularly the thing that we have, the pattern across the sector that we have is that we'd like to see more diversity of careers consultants in particular, because we recognise that actually it's often careers consultants who are that kind of visible face, if you like, literally the visible face of the service for students, because they're the ones that are delivering the guidance and the education, and they therefore have the closest relationship with students. And we do understand that actually from a student perspective, it's really important to be able to relate to us and to be able to surface issues that a student might find where they want to talk to someone about any concerns they might have about how their ethnicity might play out in the labour market, for example, or their sexuality or anything like that. So being diverse is really important so the students can relate to us and feel comfortable having those conversations. So like many universities, we are thinking about how can we be more diverse in how we attract talent, particularly into the careers consultant group, so we can make sure that we are really relatable for students. So we're thinking about how can we advertise our roles differently, how can we change our recruitment practices to make sure that we're being as inclusive as possible.
Alongside your day job at City St George's, you're the Integrating Employability Director at AGCAS, which is the national membership organisation for higher education career professionals. How do you feed in and draw from that national picture in leading careers and employability at your institution?
It was a great privilege to be elected to the board of AGCAS, and in particular, as you say, to be leading on the thematic area of sector-wide best practice for embedding employability in the curriculum. It's been a really enjoyable and fantastic experience. I definitely recommend anyone who's listening to this to get involved with their professional body. I think it really opens your eyes to what's happening in other universities. It gives you great sector connections, people that you wouldn't normally get to meet. I think in a very practical way, what I do is I provide informal support for universities at all different stages on the journey of thinking about how they embed employability in the curriculum. So I give them informal advice about considering their strategies, and I'm essentially a sounding board for different ideas. And I'm also part of a group of volunteers that we draw from the sector who've been producing resources and training materials for the sector. So I think whilst I help other universities, I'd also say I get as much back from it as they get from me. It's great to hear from what's happening in other universities. So I feel much better informed about sector developments than if I wasn't involved with ICAS. So it means that I'm able to bring that best practice to my day job as well as helping other people.
Finishing up our conversation today and reflecting on everything that you've talked about, your department is clearly a prime example of a careers and employability service that's transformed from being what some might have historically seen as an extra add-on through to being a core part of the institutional life and of students' lives as well. Looking into the medium term, how do you see the roles of career professionals and their departments evolving further into the future?
Yeah, I think there's been massive changes in the time that I've been in the sector already. There's been huge change. So I mentioned before, I think we're a lot more data focused than we ever were before. We have much better quality and quantity of data, and we're much better at using that data, I think, than we used to be as a sector. I think not just City St George's, but lots of universities now, the career services are much more integrated into all stages of the student journey, and the curriculum as part of that. And I think we have a much broader range of services and staff within careers than we ever used to have before. I mentioned before about data specialists and marketing specialists, and obviously lots of employer engagement and uni temps and all of these other things. It's much broader, the roles that you get within our service now. And our partnerships with technology suppliers are becoming much more important than they used to be. So as our work gets more expansive in its scope and scale, and what I was saying before about the challenge of staying on top of everything and the priorities that we have, how we effectively leverage technology is really critical, because we cannot rely on the old methods of just in-person delivery for everything. We have to think about technology more. We have to think about how we leverage that to have more of an impact. So I think in future we'll continue to see some more of this. I think we'll continue to see even more focus on data, probably live data, so much more kind of timely data than we are able to have at the moment. Technology, I think, will come to the fore more. AI is obviously a really critical conversation that we're having, as to what extent can we ethically use AI in how we support students and support our students to use AI themselves as well in their career decision making. Embedding in the curriculum, obviously. I think that in the latest survey we did as AGCAS, 67% of career service leaders said they expected to do more embedded employability activities in the curriculum. So it's not just City St George. I think across the sector, career services are looking to embed more in the curriculum. And last but not least, our international students. So I think this is the big topic that many people have yet to really tackle, is how do we really effectively support our international students? How do we really effectively support them to have successful careers in their home countries? I think that remains a massive question for lots of us in the sector.
Gemma, it's been great talking to you today. Thank you so much for being my guest.
Thank you very much.
Job Shadowing HE was written and presented by Susanna Marsden, and you can find out more information about her consultancy work at susanamarsden.co.uk. Audio production and music was by me, Rodri Marsden. Find out more about this podcast and hear previous episodes at jobshadowinghe.com.